Hi, and welcome to part 4 of the Introduction to ezJavascript series. So far in our build tree function that we've been creating throughout the series, we've added the ability to create containers and subcontainers, and we also added the ability to add different geom plugins, so rectangles or circles, in our JSON definition, and create plugins based off the values that we pass it in our definition. So in the previous video, we added the material definition to our JSON, but we didn't support it in our function yet. So we're going to start off by creating the material for our containers. So I'm just going to only create it on the first child. So I'm going to remove the definition over here. And let's start by creating our geometry function. So just like we did for the set geom and set vertex, I'm going to create a new function called set material, and this function is going to be used to create materials on our target containers. So I'm going to pass it two functions, two properties, the target and the data. So the target is the container that we want to apply the material to. So let's define this as a container. Container target. And the data will be the data from the JSON definition defining the RGB values of our material. So let's do error checking, make sure that we get data passed. If not, we escape this function. Okay, so let's create the material. So create a new variable called material, and this is gonna, on the target container, we have, because it's a container, we have the function called create material. So the material variable here is our new material. So now we need to set the properties of that material. Now I'm going to create a new function called setColor. Let's just create this over here. Function setColor. And the reason why I'm creating this in a separate function is that it will allow us to support the different types of material, so diffuse, ambient, and the other options that we have. So in the set color, we're going to give it the target, the data and the name, and then I'm going to create a new, save the value. If we check that we have a value, and if we do, then we can say target set the name dot r8 equals value dot, that's our r value, and we have to do the same for the green and blue. So this will be b, g, and then we'll call this G and B. Okay, that covers the set color function, and we go back to our set material function, and once we have our material, we're going to call the set color, pass it the material, we're going to pass the data and the property that we want to, which color option we want to change. So if we look back at our JSON function, we have our material and we only have the diffuse defined. So that's what I'm passing into the function over here. And we can add support for the other material types. So let's show that a few here. For example, if we want to support specular and ambient, and then we just need to set these values, define them in our JSON. But in this video, I'm just going to be using the diffuse property. So now that I have my set material function, we need to add it to our build tree, the main function. So set material, I'm going to pass it the target, which is our container, and the material data, so node.material. Remember, if we look at our JSON structure again, we have our node and we have our material property. So that's what we're passing it to the set material function. So that's what we've done here. Now if I go ahead and I hit run, oh, target is not defined, so we have an error. I misspelt it, so let's just fix this up, and I hit run. So there we go. If I close my container, you can now see that our rectangle has been created with a red material. And I can go back to our JSON definition, and if I want, for example, a green material, it's now green, and I can do a mixture of any RGB values that I want. So now I have a green material, and that's how easy it is to define the materials. So what I want to do now is the next thing I want to do in this video is cover functions. So for example, Autofollow or text control object, something like that. So let's go back to our JSON and create a new definition for new containers that are going to have these different plugins on them. So I'm going to take the second child that we created here, and instead of geometry, I'm going to remove the geometry definition, and I'm going to use this to create our different we're going to create a container with a control text object on it, and it's going to also have a autofollow plugin on it. So let's go ahead and do that. Inside the definition here, I'm going to create a new object called functions, because these are going to be the function plugins. And this is going to be an array of objects. So the first thing I want to do is create the first function, which will be our control text. So I'm going to give it a name and call it control text. And just like we did with the geometry, I want to pass it the parameters. So I'm going to set the parameters of that plugin. And this is going to be an array of parameters. First parameter we're going to do is set the field ID. So the name will be field ID. The type will be a string. And the value that we want to pass it will be my field. So I think that's the only parameter we're going to set for the control text. Let's go ahead and add our definition for the autofollow plugin. So I'm going to add another object to the array over here. And again, I'm going to give it the name of the plugin I want to create, so autofollow, and again we need an array of parameters, and we're going to pass it a few parameters this time. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this object from over here to save some time. So the first property we want to change is the default distance. So the autofollow plugin has the property default distance, and this will be a float, and the value will be let's set it to 11. No, let's do 11. And I'm going to copy this again, add another parameter. This time it's going to be the progress. The value, it's going to be a float as well, and this I'm going to say 22. and one more parameter. This will be the maximum distance. This will be a type float, and we'll set this to 33. I think that's enough for this example. So just to review the JSON structure that we have here, we have our main container, which is the parent container over here. Then we have subnodes, so sub-containers. The first one will be called first child, and it will have a geometry plugin, which is a rectangle, and we set the material to this yellow color. So that's the first child, and then we have the second child, where we set the position as well, and then we have functions object with a control text plugin and the Autofollow plugin. So now we can go ahead and add the function to support these function plugins. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Just like we did before, we're going to create a new function called setFunction, and we're going to pass it the target and the data. So the target variable is going to be a container, so I'm going to define that. Container target, and now we just make sure we mouse over the target and we can see that it is a container. Perfect. And like we did before, we make sure that we're getting data, so a bit of error checking. If we didn't get any data or data is undefined, we're just going to exit this function. Okay, so now we can start adding the function plugins. So let's create a new variable called func, and we're going to add it to the target. The target's a container, so we can do call the create function function on that container. And what we need to do is pass the built-in function. Remember, if we go back and look at our geom set geom, we did the same except we passed geom instead of function. So this time we're going to pass the function star, and I'm going to pass it the name. Let's go back to the JSON and make sure that's correct. So inside our functions, we have the name of each function plugin. So that's what we're passing over here. Okay, once we've done that, all we have to do is call the set plugin function that we created in part 3 of this video, the video series, just so that you guys remember what it does. This is the set plugin function where it sets the values of a plugin. Okay. So set plugin, what we want to pass it is the function that we just created over here on the line above, and we want to pass it the data of that plugin, the JSON definition, that is. So that looks good as it is. Let's just make sure we haven't missed anything. Okay, so the last thing that we need to do, because functions is an array, we actually need to handle, we need to loop over this array and make sure we're adding all the functions. So in the build tree function, I'm going to first check that this node has a functions definition, and if it does, then we're going to loop over them. So for let func in of node dot functions. So we're going to loop over each function definition in the JSON, and for each one we're going to call the set function and pass it the target and our function definition. And that's it. So let's go ahead and close this, and if we run the script now, we should have the autofollow and text control plugin on the second container. And there you go. So if we now check this property, you can also see that the field identifier is my field. That's what we set in the JSON definition. And if we look at the autofollow, we can see our distance, progress, and max distance values have been set based on the JSON definition. So that brings us to the end of this video. In the next video, which will be the last one in the series, we're going to show you how we can use a JSON definition that is stored externally by calling it using an HTTP request in our scene. So thanks for watching, and if you're interested into how to do HTTP requests, make sure to check out the next video. Thanks for watching.